Before I do anything else, I'm going to figure out why this thing derailed while it went around and see about fixing it. I have noticed a couple things already. If you look here, you can see just barely that the frame is not completely even. Looks like these drive wheels are a little bit lower than the others, so it can wobble back and forth a little bit. I also noticed that the weight is extremely unbalanced. You can see the point of balance is right there between the two back wheels. It should be closer to the center for best traction on all 8 of the drive wheels. So I'll see what I can do to correct those problems, and hopefully that'll be enough to fix it, and if not, I'll keep looking. Well, I figured out the issue with not all the drive wheels touching the track. The frame was bent just a little bit. Probably happened during assembly. The metal is very soft, so it's easy to bend it, but it's also easy to unbend it and get it exactly like it's needed. All I did was I put it on the edge there and then just shaped it however I needed. That worked out pretty well. I also found that the valve gear hanger here that I made, it was interfering with the body a little bit. So I filed a little groove to where it goes. At most angles it's not really noticeable, so it won't make the thing look any worse at all. And now the body sits flat on there and the frame is no longer bent. All drive wheels are on the track. Another little issue I found is that the heights of the tinder and engine frame are pretty uneven, so it was causing the drawbar to be at an angle, in some direction anyway, and it was kind of pushing down on the back of the engine and causing the front to lift up. So I'm replacing that straight one with this curved one that I made from brass, and I insulated the one side so that they won't short against each other. It's also a little bit shorter than the other one, so the engine tinder won't have quite that extreme distance between each other, and this should fix the issue of them being uneven. The new drawbar did help a little bit, but the main problem does seem to be the balance. You've got that weight sitting on top of there with the shaft holding it in to the smokestack. So far it hasn't derailed even once. So just keep testing it like this for a little while longer and then see about adding some weight inside the boiler. I did find one more issue while I was doing some testing. The front truck here the sides were just too far apart, so the axle could move all over the place in there and was just going out of alignment. So I squeezed right here with pliers and brought those two sides as close as I could together without the truck getting in the way of the wheels. And then I also did some bending to make sure that can sit nicely on the track. So we'll see how that does. Another modification I've made just to smooth things out, make it that much quieter and better running, is I built this support bearing here using a piece of brass tube and brass sheet, screwed it down to the frame. This is soldered together at just the right angle for the shaft, and that keeps the free-floating gearbox from moving around too much. Helps keep it aligned. And there's one more piece to improve this that I think will help it to run better. It is a weight that I just made out of lead, so I'll slide that into the boiler, glue it in place, and hope for the best. Alright, here we go again. Made it once. That does at 12 volts. And made it again. It's looking good. Let's try reverse. See some lifting in the rear truck. That should just take some filing. I think that'll be done. Well, it's finally making it around. No derailments. So a couple more minor tweaks, and now I can get started on the other side of that valve gear. I'm not sure how easily you can see this in the video, but these gears are actively wearing themselves out. I've got the mesh right, I've got plenty of grease in there, and yet those teeth are just grinding down. So it looks like I'll be checking into some replacement Northwest Shortline gears, which I was hoping to use the originals in here, but oh well. Got the Northwest Shortline gearbox assembled and installed. I had to do a lot of filing in the chassis to make that fit because it's a little wider than the old Arbour gearbox, but the height of the worm shaft is exactly the same, so I was able to reuse that support without any modification, and it now runs very, very smoothly and quietly, and I don't think I'll be having another gear failure. And while I was at it, I decided to power up the motor with some new magnets. I used the regular stack in the rear, and then to add some additional power, I put a magnet on top with the polarity flipped from this one so that it would add to the circle of polarity, and then two more small ones down here to help balance it out. And the results are very good. The current draw is much less, the control is better, and it has a lot more power and a slower, more realistic top speed. Oh, and I also did have to file off the top of the gearbox so that it would fit in place underneath the boiler, because originally it was taller than the Arbour gearbox by maybe a couple millimeters, so it didn't take too much. And that's all right as it should be now, so I can continue. Here are the parts I'll be using. I've got various thicknesses of brass wire, which I'll hammer down and shape. I've got the original Arbour rod and a couple PSC parts and a tiny screw. You might remember from a couple videos ago when these parts were all breaking on me and I was frustrated with them. And I had a chance to work on another one of these valve gear kits a while back, and those parts were made from a better quality, more flexible brass in the case of that other kit. So it looks like this here, where these were too hard and brittle, was just a fluke. So the quality is better than what I thought before, which is good. I'm going to start by making that U-shaped piece to replace the one that broke. I need 25 millimeters of wire to do that. I've cut this one just slightly longer, and this is my thicker brass wire. So now I'll just take this steel weight. I've got it on my anvil from my vise, and I'll just hammer that flat. I'll have to go up and down a few times until it's just right, but that's all there is to it to making the flat piece. And there's the flattened piece. It's still got some thickness to it, but it's also the width I want. So now I'll bend that into shape and drill the holes and make the other two smaller pieces for it. Now, to get the shape just right, I have to do kind of a gentle bend instead of a sharp 90-degree bend. So I put the piece around the side of the small screwdriver there and bend that to the shape of the screwdriver. So that gives me the bend that I need. Now, to complete this, I have to make a couple more small pieces using the middle size wire I have here. These really short pieces are a lot easier to make because all you need is smooth jaw pliers like these that have a good flat meeting. Line up the wire in there, give it a good squeeze, and it's flat. When making each of these tiny pieces, I found that I have to make sure to drill the holes before I put them together, and I use a small hand drill to do that. Make sure that drill bit can go straight through both holes. And then once these are fully drilled, I can put the parts together. And there's that piece finished. And that was actually the most complicated of all the parts, so the rest are just rods and should be easy enough to make. I just have to cut them to the same lengths and sizes as the last ones. Before finishing the valve gear, I found one more issue that I hadn't quite noticed before. I've never been able to get the thumping motion out of this. I thought it was just the side rods, but as it turns out, every single axle was quartered at about 85 degrees instead of the proper 90 degrees. So that thumping was coming from out of quarter wheels. The 5/16 axles, they don't fit my Northwest Shortline quartering tool, so I had to eyeball it, but even with just that, it's already much smoother. No more thumping noise. All it needs is a little more fine tuning, and that will be as smooth as this will ever get, I think. It's already looking much better than before. Now that I realized the problem was out of quarter drive wheels, I found that when I was expanding these holes earlier, I overcompensated for that out of quarterness. So now I'm using the round file to expand the holes further and putting these brass inserts into them to bring them back down to where they need. And if that works, I think that'll make it smoother and maybe even longer lasting. Well, it's not perfect, but I think that's about as good as it's going to get for now. And that will hopefully improve further with runtime. But for now, that's running fairly smooth. Now I can get on to the rest of the valve gear. Right here you can see the assembled precision scale parts that I'm using from their valve gear. And I assembled my scratch-built piece to it. To do that, I inserted a small pin made of this wire through each hole and put just a dot of glue on each hole so it would only hold to this one part and not to any parts in here, because those have to move freely. And then I just wiped off any excess glue, and that is now in place. And the eccentric is on, and I also glued the valve gear hanger and other parts onto there, connected the linkage, and like the other side, I bent this around to clear everything just right. Even though it doesn't look as realistic, it works. So good enough for me. And it's nice and smooth, just the way it needs to be. Alright, now I've got the reverse gear rods to hold things in place. I used one of the precision scale parts, modified it slightly so that it would fit, mounted on a piece of brass wire, and then this rod here is made from two pieces of brass wire that have been shaped and glued together. And that all fits and works, so now I can move on to the rest. There's the rest of the valve gear rods, all hammered out, cut and drilled and shaped. And this is kind of a trial and error process to make these, so some of these I started and then had to redo with a new piece of metal, just because drilling these little holes is really tedious in something that small. Especially this rod here, because I had to hammer that out paper thin to be large enough for that large hole to fit the 080 screw. But that's all ready for installation now, so I can get onto that and be done with the chassis. And now I've got that part of the linkage assembled. And to do this, I soldered some short pieces of brass wire onto this one here, and those face in whatever direction I need, and then slipped those on, crimped the ends of the wire, and cut them down to length. So now that is together, shouldn't come apart again, and I can put it on. After remaking just one part because I got the length slightly wrong, I've finally got this thing together. It's not perfect, but it does work. And with that, I am finally done with the mechanical portion.